Have you ever noticed your child getting a little bit too silly? Maybe picking fights with their siblings or suddenly retreating into themselves and just completely shutting down? Maybe they've even started to make those weird little strange noises, the grunts, the growls, the hissing, and you're there thinking, who are you and what have you done with my child? And maybe like, where is this going to end? You know those moments, right? Here's the thing. Those small, sometimes quirky behaviors, they are not random. They are very often early warning signs that your child is becoming overwhelmed or dysregulated. And that is actually when they need your help the most. The thing also is that if you learn how to spot these early warning signs, you can step in before things start to basically spiral out of control and you're left with like this meltdown that leaves everyone completely drained and exhausted. So, I'm Stephanie Pinto and I'm the host of the Emotionally Intelligent Parenting Podcast. Today, I'm diving into the subtle and sometimes not so subtle signs that your child is struggling to stay calm and regulated, because these are the moments that can literally make or break your day as a parent. Trust me, I have been there. So I'm going to be sharing real life examples, I'm going to be sharing practical tips and of course strategies that you can use right away to spread some calm and respond more effectively. So if you're tired of getting caught off guard by the tantrums or the tears or the chaos, then stick around. You can absolutely turn those baffling and sometimes really frustrating moments into opportunities of connection and literally avoid blow-ups altogether sometimes. Because this is the very start of a new year, 2025, I thought, you know what, there are maybe some people who are tuning into the podcast for the first time, so I will just give a little teensy intro about me and who I am before we actually dive into the episode. I mentioned I'm Stephanie Pinto. I'm a mum of two and a wife to one, and I'm here in Sydney, Australia. And I'm a best-selling author, an international speaker, and an award-winning coach on all things emotionally intelligent parenting. And although we are far from perfect as parents, that's not what this is about. Our kids still have big emotions from time to time, but meltdowns are few and far between. And due to all this stuff that we are learning, the stuff I'm going to be talking about today, we have such a great relationship with our kids. They tell us stuff, they open up to us, they apologize and make amends when they know they're wrong and they've done something that isn't okay. Like, we genuinely are seeing and reaping the rewards, I want to say, of the way that we are raising our kids. Our go-to strategies are compassion, listening, problem solving, empathy, and a lot of conversation, a lot of talking with our kids. We give them the benefit of the doubt. We give them time to move through their emotions, and we do not threaten and shame and punish and use harsh consequences and all of that kind of basically outdated, unhelpful stuff. We're only able to do this because we've learned how to handle our own emotions. We understand our kids' emotions and behavior, and we work together to solve problems as a team. So that's a little bit about us. I want to acknowledge the Dysregulation Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which I live, work, and record this podcast. I pay my respects to all First Nations people, their elders and ancestors, and I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and I stand in solidarity towards a shared future. Let's jump into the episode today. So I actually think this is a really powerful piece of emotional intelligent parenting. I remember when I started to really get the hang of this and how profound it was for our whole family. Just last year, I was with the kids in the local library. We were getting a couple of books and just bringing them home, to read. And my oldest, so our son, he'd picked a book or picked one or two books and he was done. And then our youngest was taking her time, I'm going to say. She was looking through lots of books, very indecisive and things like that. And so I saw very quickly these early warning signs in my oldest, and I was like, oh, here we go. Like, now my brain switches on and I'm like, oh, he's on that track. His train is on that track. Like, we better wrap this up, or I better do something. I better make a change, because he's not going to be able to handle this situation or this environment or the problem, whatever it is, much longer. And so I'm kind of giving you maybe a bit of not a summary, but a takeaway off the get-go, is that if we don't put in place some accommodations or some supports or change the task or the environment, if we don't do that when our kids are showing these early warning signs, part of me wants to say that's on us. the meltdown is kind of on us. Not that it's our fault, of course, if our child totally, blows up or becomes so dysregulated that they're really overwhelmed and it's so stressful. I'm not saying it's our fault, but I'm saying more often than not, 99 times out of 100, we can do something, or maybe stop doing something that would redirect the kind of train tracks and how the situation plays out for our kids, which in turn affects us, right? That day at the library, it could have all just I want to say the shit could have hit the fan. It didn't, because I, made some changes. I said to my youngest, look, we're just going to be at the entry to the library. Your brother's he's over it, he's not got any patience and he's found his book, you keep looking and I'm just going to be over there where I can see you. But yeah, some of his early warning signs are going to come up in this list because, he's, everyone is different, but he definitely ticks some of these boxes. He was getting, to nutshell it for you, he was getting really wriggly. He actually looked like one of those, what are they called? Those inflatable giant stick men that are at car washes and at new store openings. You know how they have they're inflated and the air keeps pushing them and their arms and legs are going wild by the side of the road? I swear that's what he looked like. His facial expression had changed into one of I want to say despair, real frustration. He was so agitated. He was getting red as well, and obviously his voice had changed and he was just wriggling around. Anyway, so I could totally tell. And we made some changes, and then that avoided, honestly, a very hairy situation. So let's go through some of these signs. I have different I pull together lots of different things like behaviors or physical signs and emotional signs that are going to help you go, oh, that's what my child does, no wonder. And maybe next time I see that, I can make some changes or some accommodations, like I said. So I've got behavioral signs, I've got physical signs like biomarkers on, from the body. We talk about that a lot. Emotional signs, of course. Social signs that you might be like, what are these social signs? I've got a few of those that are really interesting to be aware of. Cognitive signs, so thinking wise, you can kind of see your kids' thoughts change and their thinking changes. And then this is really cool, some subtle signs that often go unnoticed. There's about 4 of those. So I have my notes in front of me. I also, of course, then after that have about 5 things that you really should avoid, because if you don't, then yes, you are headed for, a really stressful, overwhelming situation with your kids. And then a bunch of quick practical tips of things that you can do that, of course, you have to just individualize to your family and your kids and to the situation. You might not be able to do them all, but man, sometimes even if you just do 1 or 2, you are in an extraordinarily better position to, leave that situation or finish the task or whatever with everyone's kind of emotions intact, I want to say. Okay, so let's start with the behavioral signs. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but I want you to kind of think about what resonates with you and your child. If you have more than one child, then you're going to, they're all different. It's really good to think about. So the first one is inattentiveness. So if your child seems extra distracted or like they're in their own world, it might be harder for them to focus because they're becoming dysregulated. Something is weighing on them or upsetting them or challenging them and things like that. Lack of cooperation, that's kind of like par for the course. If your child suddenly refuses to help or to do something or to follow your directions or do what you ask, this could be a way of them basically saying, I'm overwhelmed, I can't handle this right now. Actually, it just brought up a memory for me. Our youngest, who again, you saw in the video just before in the intro, she will often say, just recently, I'm so proud of her. She says, Mum, you're telling me too many things at once. I can't handle this. You need to just tell me one thing at a time for my brain. And I remember telling Alex, my husband, that, and I was like, babe, guess what she just said? This is so crazy. And they think alike, the apple did not fall far from the tree there. And so he was like, yep, I totally get her. It's really interesting, really good having someone in the family who totally gets, she is like him, and then our son is like me. Don't know if that makes sense. Okay. So the third, I want to say like behavioral sign, these early warning signs, is the antagonizing siblings, or it could be friends, like antagonizing other kids, right? My kids used to always pick fights with each other when they were starting to feel out of sorts. It can definitely be a sign that they are starting to struggle emotionally. Repetitive behaviors is another one. That can be like, sometimes for some kids, rocking or pacing or repeating the same movement over and over again. Also, like, I want to say jerky movements where they're not fluid or flowing, or kind of flexible, like movements that are really, like stomping the feet or grabbing holding their wrists together. They're a fist together kind of thing. Sometimes these can really show us that our child's body is becoming, and their nervous system is becoming dysregulated, like it's out of balance, it's out of harmony. Impulsivity, again, goes without saying. This can be, when your child is like grabbing things or interrupting or acting without thinking. This can really mean that they're starting to obviously have trouble controlling those impulses because they are getting dysregulated. Withdrawing, so I mentioned that right at the start, like in the intro, sometimes our kids just go quiet or they just want to be alone. If your child is like retreating and it's not usual for them, it is it's worth checking in and seeing how they're feeling. Doesn't mean you have to have a big powwow. If they're removing themselves or having time in their room on their own, that's for a reason. But I'm saying just don't go hands off and be like, well, she'll come out when she's ready. I mean, maybe she will, but maybe also you could just check in and see how she is. And then the last one is interrupting or talking excessively. So I don't know how many of you might think that was me when I was a kid. I work with a lot of parents in coaching who say this was them getting told off for talking a lot. I was kind of the other way, actually. I was usually very quiet because I was nervous and shy. Anyway, so if you notice your child talking nonstop or getting louder or getting faster, then this can definitely be a sign that their emotional state is like bubbling up. Okay, so hopefully you've mentally ticked a few boxes there with your kids, and just keep these in mind. They are really, really helpful to know about and to keep in, forefront when your child is kind of heading down that road. Physical signs are the next kind of category, I want to say. Real silliness, like excessive silliness, excessive laughter. People don't realize that, like, when our kids are acting over the top, goofy, or giggling nonstop, maybe even when things are not funny, like, that's a sign of dysregulation too. It might be a sign that their nervous system is trying to cope when they're feeling overwhelmed. And another memory just popped up, and I used to feel so bad when this happened. I didn't realize at the time. I think now I realize. When I was getting like beyond frustrated with my kids not doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing, let's say at bedtime, oh my goodness, I would start, and if they were getting upset and then we were all getting mad and cranky and just emotions were like hitting the fan, I would actually start giggling. I would start laughing, and then it would no wonder make my kids even more mad, because how kind of infuriating is that, and disrespectful. It does not help the situation when someone's laughing and you're really upset. And I just couldn't help it. I literally had to turn away and cover my face, and I feel really bad about it, even now, like remembering it, because of course that was not my intention. Ooh. So let's look at the next one. This is grunts, growls, or hissing, like these verbalizations or vocalizations. If you've ever heard your child making these strange noises when they're frustrating, again, it can be a sign of dysregulation. It can be a sign of their best attempt at expressing their discomfort or their frustration or their disappointment or even anxiety when they can't find the words, when they can't muster the words. By the way, it's pointless to say use your words when your child is doing that, because in that moment, especially if you can see all these other signs that they're dysregulated, that genuinely is the best that they can do in this moment under these circumstances. Okay, restlessness or fidgeting. If your child can't sit still and they're like tapping their fingers or they're bouncing around, and yes, I get that can sometimes be really annoying, especially if you're trying to do something or concentrate or do your work, or maybe you're in a place like a church or, temple, and they're supposed to be kind of quiet and still. Well, yes, I get that that's not ideal, but just be wary that it can again be a sign of dysregulation and that emotions are, building. Okay, so lots of physical activity, like if your kids are starting to run, jump, climb on the furniture when they're wound up, well, that does say a lot sometimes too. That hyperactivity could be it could be typical for your child, especially if maybe your child is neurodivergent, maybe they have ADHD, maybe that is like the resting level for their nervous system. But if this is not usually like them, or they're a bit different to usual, or, you're not usually so hyper kind of thing, then just, again, take note that this could mean that your child needs you to step in and then support them, offer some options, make some accommodations and things like that, which we will get into. The last couple are changes in facial expression. I feel like this should have been the first one because this is really common. Like when you can see it all over, let's say, your partner's face. Sometimes they come home from work or they, walk in the door and you're like, oh, you can tell, like, most of the time emotions are written all over people's faces. Definitely not always. So I should have rephrased that, but not always, but it can be a dead giveaway, especially on kids. But, keep in mind that sometimes people, masking is such a common behavior, I guess, or coping mechanism that people use, especially kids, when they are, not feeling okay in certain situations. So look for maybe like a tight smile, or clenched cheeks, or this tension, maybe a furrowed brow, clenched jaws, that kind of thing. These subtle shifts can definitely tell us when our kids are starting to lose their cool. And then heavy breathing or sighing, like when they're huffing and puffing. I definitely notice this in my kids. You'll ask them to do something and they'll be like, ugh. I'll be like, what? I literally just said, can you put your shoes on the shoe rack? Like, seemingly something really small. But we can sometimes, see these seemingly, what do I want to say, like exaggerated sighs and things like that. That's a body's way of showing that it is stressed. And I will actually do it. And Alex, my husband, will be like just on the other side of the room on his computer, and he'll hear it through the bookshelf, and he'll be like, babe, you okay? And I'm like, what? And he goes, you just did a huge sigh. And I didn't even realize, but yes, I'm like in the middle of something that's stressing me out. Anyway. Okay, so emotional signs, these can be things like irritability or snappiness, like being snappy at the littlest things. Again, kind of a red flag that maybe they're not feeling balanced and need your support. Overreaction, or maybe a perceived overreaction to a minor frustration. We have to be really careful that something that we perceive as a tiny problem can be a huge boulder in the road for another person, an adult or a child. So we have to be careful and honor that. But again, notice it's a sign of dysregulation, or that something is up, something's getting in your child's way. Increased sensitivity as well. So being bothered by maybe noises or touch or even the tiniest comment, these can lead our kids to feel overwhelmed. It can be a sign of that they are overwhelmed. So noticing that, when they're seemingly more sensitive than usual or something is different, again, just really honor that. And I guess maybe mood swings or perceived mood swings can go with that as well. So going from giggles to tears in the blink of an eye. I remember my youngest particularly doing that. She seemed to really just chop and change night and day. And I was like, what is going on? And then I realized, this thing was under her iceberg and she was dealing with it and I didn't even realize. Okay, so some social signs, I kind of mentioned them before. These are things like demanding attention, difficulty sharing or taking turns, struggling to read social cues in others. Sometimes if you've ever had your child misunderstand a joke or take a comment the wrong way, I know I do that. I want you guys to think as well about, do you do some of these things? Because I know I do. This happens when I'm stressed or overwhelmed, or yes, my train is on that track where it's going to end in an adult meltdown. I will take a comment from my husband the wrong way. And I sometimes I know it, but yet I still get like snappy and I still get offside by what he says. So there's some social signs. Cognitive signs, so the thinking habits or the thinking patterns, this can actually look like a difficulty following instructions. So if they seem confused or forgetting what you've said, maybe their brain is too overwhelmed to process it all, right? Their tiny brains are under construction, at the best of times. And so we add on some emotional stress or some pressure or something like that, then, our child's brain is not going to be able to cope. It's got this like extra cognitive load, is what I'm trying to say. Rigid thinking goes along with this. It might look like our kids are insisting to do things their way, or they get really upset when plans change. Definitely could be a little early warning sign that they are feeling emotionally stuck. Okay, a sign of dysregulation. And then the last one, things like overthinking and perfectionism. Ooh. So sometimes getting frustrated because things just aren't right or aren't the way they need to be. Again, I can fall into the trap of this. I can definitely be a perfectionist sometimes, and it will be heightened when I have a lot on my plate, and so I'm emotionally drained or draining. So again, something really helpful to keep in mind if you're ticking some of these off mentally with your kids. Okay, this is the interesting one. Here we go. Subtle signs that often go unnoticed. So when I was doing research for this episode and looking around and asking people and things like that, these 4 things, I've got 4 here, they came up and I was like, oh my God, like I think I've seen every single one of these in not only my kids, but me and my husband too. So here we go. Number 1 is repetitive complaints. So my kids would start saying things like, I'm bored, or this is stupid, over and over. And that was a surefire sign that they were like struggling with something inside or just feeling off balance. Okay. Again, a perfect time to step in and see if you can support them or provide some strategies or accommodations. The next one was avoidance behaviors. So sometimes I will avoid something that I usually don't mind because I'm just at my capacity. Same thing for our kids. I think we need to really honor and respect that our kids are like under even more layers than us because we have life experience. We have, the wisdom of like past experience and things like that. And we have a fully developed brain. Our kids just don't. So they might be trying to escape stress without even really realizing it by not doing the thing that usually they can do. Usually they can put their shoes on the rack. Usually they can put their plate in the dishwasher or in the sink. Usually they can share the TV remote, whatever it is. When that is not happening, there is something getting in the way. I feel like I'm quoting one of my favorite people, Dr. Ross Green. Anyway, so that's 2. The third one is procrastination, or even over-focusing. So bear with me on this one. Sometimes spending ages on a task or even avoiding all tasks could actually be a way of how someone is coping when they're feeling overwhelmed and dysregulated. So have you ever done that? Have you ever noticed your kids are putting something off, delaying it, procrastinating basically, and you're like, come on, it's a really quick thing, like you're always good with this, or what's wrong with you? That again, a big red flag, something to be aware of. And then the last one, sudden quietness. Sometimes I think we overlook this one or we don't realize, like I said, it's a subtle sign. When a usually chatty or bubbly kid goes quiet, then it's definitely worth asking, what is going on? What might be happening under their iceberg? Maybe they're dealing with something. Kids sometimes have really deep thoughts and profound thoughts and worries and things like that, and we won't know unless we ask them. Okay, so really, I just want to kind of reiterate that by recognizing these early warning signs, you can then step in with some strategies that might help them to either calm down, or energize up, like co-regulate with them for whatever the situation or task is requiring. It might be like a sensory break or a hug or saying, hey, I see you're feeling off. Let's figure this out together, that kind of thing. It's all about kind of trying to catch it, if possible, before it spirals, because then we can teach our kids how to do this when we're not around, either later in life or just now in the classroom or the playground. Okay, so hopefully you mentally ticked off a bunch of those. I'm going to go through 5 things that you should definitely try to avoid. Again, like, you do not have to do this perfectly. Emotional intelligence is not about being a cool, calm, collected robot 100% of the time. No way. But it is about obviously trying to just do that little bit better each day, right? Trying to improve and support ourselves and our kids in the best way. So the first one is avoid this. Reacting with frustration or yelling. Sometimes this is like the hardest thing in the world to do. I get that. Basically, this tends to just escalate the situation, and it makes it even harder for your child to regulate their body and their nervous system. So that's number 1. Second one is dismissing their feelings. Again, really common, but if you can avoid things like avoid saying things like, you're fine, or stop being so dramatic, or you know how to do this, what's wrong with you, those kind of things. This can make them obviously feel really invalidated. And then, it's kind of like adding fuel to the fire. Punishing the behavior is number 3. Obviously, ideally a big no-no, because we know if our child's nervous system is out of balance and they're emotionally getting overwhelmed, we never, ever, 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 ever want to punish that. However, we're human, so sometimes, we fall into those traps. But really, dysregulation is beyond your child's control. Punishment just kind of increases those feelings of shame. It will worsen the issue. And, we don't need to go further into it. So, number 4, I am guilty of this one. I even get told off for it sometimes. This one is overloading them with questions. So asking like, what's wrong? Or why are you acting this way? Or, what do you need? Or blah, blah, blah. Like just, what's that word where you're like bombarding them with questions? I can be like too helpful sometimes. Sometimes I just need to take a step back. But yeah, this can be even more overwhelming. We always want to kind of save all this talk and complexity and problem solving until our kids are feeling more regulated and more, in the zone for conversation and connection and discussion and stuff like that. Okay, last one is try to avoid reasoning in the heat of the moment. We know, right, that logic and reasoning do not work with a child who is dysregulated because their brain is offline, especially that frontal lobe where all the logic and the reasoning is. And this is why I say so often that when your child is being unreasonable, it's because they've lost access to the reasoning part of their brain. So they're supposed to basically be acting how they are. Obviously, just wait until they're calm to then discuss the situation and what happened. Okay, so they're things to avoid. Let's quickly go through some practical tips because I actually think that is like the meat of the episode. I know that sounds really weird. Like we're often looking for like, what do I do? What do I do instead? And how can I, what are some tips and strategies? I will go through some, but I often think just being aware of it is like the big first step. So if you take nothing away, but from some of those, from the episode, but some of those points that I've already gone through, then that's actually going to be really, really helpful for you. Okay. So it goes without saying that number 1, we ideally want to stay calm and regulated ourselves, not just in the moment, but like, what are you doing for your self-care at other times during the week? You can't just zoom right in and fix the situation and be different in the situation. Sometimes we need an overall look at how much am I, spending, like time-wise, energy-wise on my ability to regulate in stressful moments. Okay. So self-care, not a buzzword. I always say that. Acknowledging and validating feelings when our kids are getting dysregulated, when we see those early warning signs, bam, that's a huge one. Just acknowledge and just validate. Sometimes that's all you need to do. Using neutral and non-threatening language is massive because imagine if your partner sees that you are getting antsy or irritated or agitated, and they're coming in with like, stop being so silly, or why are you being ridiculous, or oh, is it this again? Like, oh my God, that's like a red rag to a bull. So yes, ideally we want to avoid blaming, shaming, threatening language and stuff like that. Always focusing on connection first. Okay, so something like, hey, I'm here to help, or I've got you, we'll get through this together, or I'm right here, that kind of thing. Sensory breaks are amazing. I think I've talked lots about how much I love OTs, occupational therapists. If we can, they are obviously brilliant at understanding the sensory system, sensory preferences, accommodations for sensory differences and things like that. So there are a whole host of sensory calming or re-regulating activities that you could, that's a whole conversation for another episode, I'm going to say. But sensory breaks can be amazing. Reducing your expectations, or I even want to say letting go of your expectations in the moment. When you notice your child is like building, and their volcano is about to explode because of this stupid homework question, please like take it off the table, metaphorically and physically. Like, how many times have I said to my kids, you know what, let's leave this for tonight, or let's leave it for today, we'll come back to it later, or we'll do it tomorrow, or you know what, we don't need to do this, right now. So reducing expectations, massive. I would love if my husband did that when I was really overwhelmed and really stressed. I would love if he said, babe, you know what, let's get takeaway tonight. No one wants to cook. I'd be like, I love you so much. Like, you have just taken the weight off my shoulders. So reducing expectations, please do not think that means your child is getting away with whatever they want to and they don't have to do the chores and like, again, a whole other conversations. That is just respectful parenting. It is smart parenting. It is emotionally intelligent parenting. If you intentionally reduce or let go of expectations based on your child's nervous system needs and emotional state, like really full stop. And the last couple of things, if it works for your child, using gentle touch, like a squeeze of the shoulders, or my kids like a back scratch or a hair pat kind of thing, that can release oxytocin, which is like the love hormone, that connection feeling and things like that. Giving them space if they need. Offering limited choices. So yes, I'm a huge advocate for giving your kids choice and control, but limited choices, meaning like, don't overwhelm them with like 30 choices of like, what do you want to do now? Because I can tell you're overwhelmed. Do you want to do this, that, this? Like, just 2 options is fine. And just obviously play it by ear, right? And the last one is co-regulation. So this might look like sitting with them or sitting near them. It might look like giving them a hug. It might look like just doing some activities like deep breathing together. It might be like lying down. I remember having a family who said, we lie down. We literally just get down on the floor, on the rug, on the carpet, whatever. And we just put our hands on our stomach and heart and just breathe together, and we relax. And I'm like, God, if kids learnt to do that when they were stressed, like how recentering and grounding that could be. That's such a good practice. Everyone just thinks it's weird though. So I would love to see people doing that, just resting, sitting, lying, whatever we need, putting some music on, coloring in. I love coloring in. It's very cathartic and it's very relaxing and mindful. So what does it look like to you to co-regulate with your kids? And the last thing I'll say is just ask them. Ask your kids when you're feeling really XYZ, what would help you? What can I do to help? Please, just have conversations with your kids about this stuff. Okay, that is my whole list. That's all my notes. I got everything out. It was longer than I planned. I wanted to be like a half-hour episode. It's a bit longer. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And I would love you even more so if you think, oh my God, this makes so much sense. Oh, I ticked so many of those boxes, or my kids do, but I need a bit more help. Like, what else, what can I do? And I don't know if this works for my child. Please consider one of the online courses I think I've got about 6 or 7 at the moment on my website. They are all around this kind of stuff, all around emotionally intelligent parenting, all around decoding and diffusing challenging behavior from your kids, what to do, what not to do. What is this thing called the nervous system? Like, how do we co-regulate? I've even got, anxiety. I've obviously got emotionally intelligent parenting specifically. There are going from reactive to responsive parenting, which was it was kind of basically how to stop yelling with your kids. So there's so much support out there. I would love you to go and check one of those out to actually deepen your learning and to really get some tools on your belt that you can actually implement. I know that podcasts and books and things like that are amazing, but once you actually invest in doing something for yourself and learning and taking notes and getting the resources and stuff that go with all the videos, like these courses I've poured my heart into, and I'm getting amazing feedback, which makes me just grin when I think about it. So yeah, that's my kind of call to action for you guys. If this makes sense and if you love it and you want to learn more, you can head on to my website. I'll put the link in the show notes, but it's stephaniepinto.com/courses. And then you'll find them all there. And a couple are on sale at the moment. I think there's about 2 that are 50% off, and it will not be for much longer because that is massive. And then we're going to do something a bit different towards the end of January, which is when we all go back to school here in Australia. Well, our kids do. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day and a great rest of your week, and I will see you same time, same place, wherever you're watching or listening now, next week for another episode. All right, thanks guys.